The Demiurge is one of the esoteric terms that has been a part of the ancient revival of knowledge that we're experiencing within the spirit of this age. So today I'm going to be explaining exactly what the Demiurge is. The Demiurge first originated within Gnosticism and Neoplatonism. Only within these two separate spiritual systems, the Demiurge can play distinctly different roles. The one commonality that they both share is that the Demiurge means craftsman or artisan. And in this age, we would know this term of the Demiurge being a craftsman of the material world to be more along the lines of what is known as an architect. So we can look at it as the Demiurge is the architect of the material realm. And so in Gnosticism, this was aligned with a negative overall worldview, meaning that the physical realm was this cast off. It was celestial dross. To Gnosticism, the physical world was a colossal abomination, a metaphysical mistake that was made to cut off our own essence from its true reality and its true realm in the pleroma, which is the spiritual perfected realm. And now, with the Demiurge being this representation of what the godlike or architect of this physical world would be, is dependent on what school of thought we come from. Sometimes this architect, which is known as Yaldabaoth, is looked at in a more sympathetic lens. He is in true ignorance that there is a creative source higher than his own and more powerful than his own. And for this, we can almost pity him, because Yaldabaoth, within this tone, never asked to be created in the first place. He only came to be because of what was considered a grave mistake through a creation process. And him being looked at as this abortion from the pleroma, who never asked to be brought into existence, is one that I personally have sympathy for. But in other parts of this story about how the Demiurge came to be, it's not so much a part of this pure ignorance of a higher power. In fact, in other parts of this concept of there being a Demiurge, the architect or the craftsman that rules over the physical realm is one who does so calculatedly and intentionally, and knows its true place, but always tries to hide exactly where its true place is located within the entire cosmos. So in Gnosticism, there is a dualistic cosmology. And what this is that the physical world is separate and distinguished from the spiritual world. But not only that, the physical world has an architect or a craftsman that we know as the Demiurge who rules over it. And we can look at this Demiurge as being a lesser god. In fact, Yaldabaoth is also known as Jehovah and as Yahweh. And so we can look at this as almost source being the entirety of physical and spiritual material planes, and source just being all consciousness. But when it goes lower in vibration, all the way into physicality, it starts to fragment so much that now we're starting to look at God and the devil as distinct and separate entities. And that's pretty much the fragmentation that's going on with the character of the Demiurge. It's looking at things as though it is the ruler of it and it is the higher power of it, even though it is a lesser god. But it's really the ego. I mean, in a spiritual sense, not what Gnosticism truly believed, but how we can look at this from a higher perception now is that the Demiurge is the ego's fragmentation into what we know as God and what we know as the devil, and that entire battle between those two forces that goes on within the lower consciousness of being inside a physical experience. There are two planets that the Demiurge is linked to. The first one is Saturn, and this would be when the Demiurge is being expressed in its malefic form. This is its most malevolent, most hostile expression. And the interesting thing about this is that when it comes to the gender of Saturn, when it's playing this role of the Demiurge, it's actually androgynous. It has both its negative feminine polarity and its negative masculine polarity summed up into this expression that we're calling the Demiurge. And so when we're looking at the Demiurge in its Saturn, in its malefic expression, it's now acting as the keeper of time, which is why we know it as Chronos, and we know that Saturn is linked with harsh lessons, karma, and time. So the Demiurge, when it's being expressed as Saturn, it's exerting high levels of entropy, because when there's high levels of entropy, that becomes perfect crystallization from a thermodynamics viewpoint. And when there's thorough, full crystallization, that's how we materialize. So Saturn is the Demiurge in this sense because it's a part of the materialization through the crystallization of our being into the physical realm. This is also where Saturn worship comes into play. We can't talk about the Demiurge if we don't also bring into the conversation Saturn and Saturn worship. Just like the 3 Abrahamic religions, which are the most popular in the world, all have their own form and their own variation that is feeding their life force to Saturn. Why? Because the Demiurge is the representation, it's symbolized through the Saturn energy, through Saturnian energy. Now, this has nothing to do with when we're talking about astrology, the harshness of Capricorn, Saturn, Aquarius. This is strictly speaking to Saturn's most hostile and malevolent expression. And when it's in this malevolent expression, it's siphoning life force through worship and through many different types of battles. Kind of like the perfect example would be the Crusades, where every team thought that they were the correct team, the most righteous, and their god and religion was the strongest and the mightiest, when in reality, all of the different violence was all going into feeding the same entity that is all traced back to feeding Saturn, which is Yahweh, or the Demiurge. So this is the Demiurge in its most brutal expression, as the force that crystallizes us here through entropy into the physical realm, but cuts us off from our higher spiritual force and leaves us to become fed off of and siphoned to go feed it by strife, conflict, suffering, violence, any type of sadism. So all the different ways that violence can be incurred into a sort of food source for its system, for its matrix. That is what is considered the Demiurge. So the best concept that we have in modern times in the spirit of this age would be the matrix. Because the matrix, even though that term is neutral and objective in and of itself, is shown in its negative polarity best through the movie The Matrix. And in that, we see how the Demiurge is playing this system that controls the consciousness of all the individuals who are plugged into it. That's perfect example. It could have just been written by Gnostics, frankly, because that's just a perfect example of the Demiurge, just in a modern, mystical setting. Anytime we hear vague phrases in the spiritual community, like the powers that be, or the forces that be, or they, it's referring to the Demiurge, because the Demiurge is that architecture of a systemic program that keeps us trapped in the illusion of time and trapped in the illusion of physical reality, where we're consuming one another in a food chain for feeding entropy. So the very fact that we have to consume food for the sake of our own survival, and that everything is based off of a food chain, has also come from a sense of a bleak and lesser God that feeds off of its creations, that actually thinks it is the ultimate creator of these creations. And the biggest food source in this setting would be the divine spark. I always ate snake meal. I just didn't know it was called that. Now, another bleak as hell feature to this Demiurge, aside from the fact that it's considered a food farm that siphons all of the life force that's contained within it like a giant battery, is that there are second-order beings. And what these second-order beings are different extensions of the Demiurge. So they're looked at as not being created by the true source creation within the pleroma. They don't contain the divine spark, the God within. And because of that, they're what we would consider second order beings, because they don't have a first connection They don't have a first link to source. And because of that, they're rulers in a sense that do the bidding of the Demiurge. And this can be looked at in the Matrix once again as the agents. The agents would be the modern concept of this. Gnosticism knew it as the archons. Just like how angels go and do the bidding of God, archons would be the highest demonic force that goes and does the bidding within the Demiurge. And this could even be within the system. So a lot of times we think that we're giving our energy into powers and institutions that have our best interest at heart. And in reality, they're entirely just archonic systems. Now, Plato had an entirely different arrangement of the cosmos and the Demiurge's role within the cosmos. Although within Plato's cosmology and Neoplatonism, it considered the Demiurge still a craftsman, but a benevolent one, a benevolent architect that held the vital role of shaping the physical universe, taking it from its unorganized, chaotic, raw materials of the void, and then creating order out of it. So synthesizing and organizing it into the different elements, into the different Platonic solids, into all of the different features. So Plato's Demiurge was benevolent, and it was considered the first emanation from the monad. So the Demiurge, according to Neoplatonism, was not actually the all. It wasn't source. It wasn't the monad. But it was that first reflection, that first awareness of viewing the all, of becoming self-aware of the monad. And from there, the Demiurge was seen as a benevolent craftsman to organize, and it had the crucial role of being able to synthesize the monad, which is a very tall order. So the Demiurge was benevolently organizing the all into what we would consider the physical realm, its physical expressions in all the different ways. And then from there, yet again, the story differs. First, we see that the Demiurge started off as this benevolent craftsman. And then in some versions of the story, we see that it had that intention for the physical realm until some things went awry and then it got cut off from that original intent. And then we see it within the Demiurge version that it is now, which it was not ever intended to be. So we have different versions of this concept of the Demiurge, but the ones that are tried and true throughout all the different veins and all the different threads of this is that the Demiurge is a craftsman of the physical reality, whether we assign that to be beautiful and benefic or malevolent and hostile. It depends on our own personal cosmology and our own sovereignty. But the Demiurge in and of itself can play both roles. It doesn't need to be in conflict. We can look at this reality for what it is within all of its negative and darker elements, and we can also acknowledge that it may be able to serve a higher, more unified purpose. And so even if there is an inherent separation within the concept of the Demiurge, so that inherent separation would be the physical realm is separate from the spiritual realm, that might serve us in some parts of our ability to extract the knowledge and the wisdom of the truth of our reality. So we might need to look at things in that paradigm to get certain knowledge that can't be accessed if we were to look at it through a different paradigm. But if we have already integrated as much as we can from viewing reality in that dualistic setting of physical reality, material plane, evil, spiritual realm, perfect, then we might be able to grow and incorporate more of the higher divine architecture that's contained within that same realm, and imbuing our consciousness with the divinity and the creative spark that we hold within would only make this program or would only make this material realm more divine. The Demiurge is us. It's representing what's going on within our own soul complex. Is this reality purely negative? Is it a food farm? Is it a simulation? Is it all divine? Is it pure heaven? Are we the creators? All these different things are how the Demiurge figures out what its creation is. And the more we imbue it with our own divinity and our own creative spark, the more we imbue it with our light, we make it divine because we are creation. We are creative energy. That's what we are. The Demiurge is this crystallization of creative energy. It's the thing that makes the divine spark physical, because what the Demiurge really means, once we move aside all of this story around it, is the ego. It represents the physical reality that the ego operates in. So how we view this physical reality, how we view having an ego, being in a seemingly separate experience from the spiritual realm, will mean different things and will be perceived different ways. It could be perceived as all divine. It could be perceived as all negative. It could be perceived as dualistic, being physical reality is evil, spiritual reality is good. It can be perceived as all being divine and yet horrific at the same time, and that would be the truest, accurate perception of it. But the Demiurge itself is the organizing force that structures spiritual essence into physicality, and it can accommodate all views. It can accommodate all forms of reality because it's trying to organize and it's trying to synthesize the monad, and the monad is everything. So the Demiurge can accommodate everyone's perception and create and organize reality and structure it in the way so that it suits whatever we are creating. So the Demiurge in this sense can be perceived as both benevolent and malevolent and everything in between. I hope this has helped organize your perception of the Demiurge. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.